Hey guys, and welcome back to Gap Grace Point Online. This month we start our very special Stand Up series, where we look at how God grants us the courage to stand up in all situations, no matter what's happening around us. For this series, we look at the book of Daniel, and we see how Daniel and his friends had to have courage and stand up for what they believed in. And so let's have a look at what the series talks about today. Have you ever had a time where you needed courage or had to act out in bravery and not be scared of something? Now, in today's story, we see how Daniel had to stand up for what he believed in for him and his friends. They had to be brave and strong and trust God, knowing that God was going to help them no matter what was happening around them. Today's story we can find in the book of Daniel, which is in the Old Testament, and we see it in chapter 1, where we see how in the time of Israel, there was a time in their history where the other countries came in and took captives. Now, in Israel, there were 4 boys that were called Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, those are some really weird names, but those are special names that were given to them because of their meaning, which always talked about God and what God had done for the people. So these guys lived many, many years after King David. And at this time, there were armies of Babylon that came into Jerusalem and took captives away. They were taken away from their families and had to leave everything behind. Imagine if someone came into your country, your hometown, and took only a certain amount of people, selecting specific people from their families, taking you away from your friends, your family, your school, and your hometown. Now that's what happened to these 4 Jewish boys. They were taken to Babylon, and as they entered the gates, their lives changed dramatically. Soon the king's officer, called Ashpenaz, came and selected of these boys that were taken captive people for the king's army. He had a very special instruction to take only the strong, healthy, and good-looking boys. And so these 4 guys were selected as part of this process. They were lucky by being selected, they weren't going to be treated as slaves. However, by being selected, they would have to adhere to some rules that the king had put in place for the people he was training for his army. For example, they had to eat specific food, and their names were changed. Their names were changed from their original Jewish names to names that honored the false gods of the Babylonian people. Daniel's name was changed to Balthazar, and the others were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Imagine having your name changed. Firstly, you moved from a country that is your own into another country, and now suddenly your source of identity, which is your name, is changed. You're a different person. Another challenge they face is that the king ordered them to eat from his table. Now, this was a big honor, and that's probably why the king did it, to show them that as part of his army, they would be treated well. However, the problem came in for these 4 boys is that the food that they were given was often offered to false gods as part of the idol worship. And they were also given food that they had specially been instructed and known, which we see in the book of Leviticus, not to eat because of their belief in God as a true God. They were faced with a conflicting situation. If we eat the food of the king, we disobey God. But if we don't eat the king's food, we obey God, but we might be killed for the choice we make. Daniel had courage because God gave him the courage he needed to stand up for what he believed in. And so he came up with an idea. They found themselves in a very difficult situation. Imagine that rule was maybe old-fashioned, no one would know, or they thought, hey, our parents aren't here, we can do what we want. But they had to have the courage to do what God had instructed them to do. And so Daniel came up with this idea to ask the God that if they were able to eat only fruit and vegetables, the God said, okay, we'll try it out for 10 days. And so they tried this experiment for 10 days. At the end of those 10 days, they were stronger and healthier than the other people who were being trained with them as part of their army, as the king's army. Those that would be eating from the king's table. And so it was agreed that those 4 men would be given only fruit and vegetables, which had been their special request, as they knew that that was what God had instructed them to do. It was difficult for them to make this decision, but they knew they had to stand up for what God had asked them to do. They had to stand up for what they believed in and whom they believed in, which was God. At the end of the 3-year training, these 4 young men were taken before the king, and all of them were screened, almost like a selection process. They were selected as part of the king's army, and not only that, it says they found favor in the eyes of the king, meaning they became one of his favorites because they were so wise. Daniel and his friends had made the right choice, even though it was difficult, to stand up for what God had instructed them to do. Sometimes we may feel that we have to stand up for something that we believe in a difficult situation. Now, this might be challenging for us, or there will be the temptation to not stand up because maybe it's an old-fashioned thing, our parents aren't around, it's silly anyway, and it'll be easier to go with the flow. But we need to stand up for what God asks us to do because we believe in God. God understands our feelings and promises to give us courage and bravery to stand up. Our memory verse for today comes from the book of Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, and it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave or forsake you." Don't forget that in today's comments, there is a link for the resource that you can do with this activity for the lesson today. Stick around for next week as we continue in our brand new Stand Up series as we look at how God calls us to have courage and empowers us to be brave, to stand up for what He asks us to do. That's it from us here at Gap Grace Point Online today. Bye guys, see you next week.